Hi besties. So, if you've been wondering when Wayfair, along with Bellin and the other parties, would finally grow a spine and clap back at Blake Lively, well, it finally happened. For months, people have been frustrated, asking, Wayfair, why are you staying silent while Blake and Ryan's team keep throwing shade, filing sanctions, and dragging names through the mud? Well, Wayfair has now responded to Blake's motion for sanctions, and let me just say, they came swinging. The catch, though? The big question is how the judge is going to react. Because, let's be real, it often feels like every time Wayfair pushes back, the judge leans toward believing Blake. And that's exactly why so many of you have been asking in the comments, why does Blake get away with filing anything she wants, no matter how nasty, while Wayfair gets heat every time they speak up? Why isn't her team ever called out for their behavior toward Brian Friedman? Here's the truth. In court, attorneys are supposed to respect opposing counsel because they're officers of the court. But this time, Wayfair and Friedman didn't hold back. Their opposition to sanctions is sharp, direct, and honestly a little savage. Blake's claim is that Brian Friedman has been orchestrating some giant smear campaign against her. She points to 10 different statements where he questioned her credibility, discussed whether she would actually show up to her deposition, which she eventually did, and called her a Hollywood elite. And well, let's be honest, she is one. But Blake's argument is that these statements violated legal ethics rules by attacking her character and reputation. Wayfair's response? Not even close. They argue that the rules don't ban attorneys from criticizing an opposing party, especially when those statements don't actually prejudice the case. In other words, just because something challenges Blake's reputation doesn't mean it taints the jury pool. They point out she has no evidence that anything they've said has biased jurors, or that it even could, especially since this trial isn't scheduled until March of next year. And then on page 5, they go straight for the jugular. They accuse Blake of ignoring her own team's very public smear campaign against Friedman and the defendants. They remind the court that Blake was already a polarizing figure long before Friedman even joined the case. They bring up the drama on the It Ends With Us set, how she encouraged people to unfollow Justin Baldoni, froze him out of the marketing campaign for a film he produced and starred in, and even shoved him and his family to the basement during the premiere. That was all before December, when Friedman got involved. Wayfair also points out that Blake herself leaked a draft of her CRD complaint to the New York Times before it was even filed, completely fueling the media frenzy she now claims to be a victim of. On top of that, her wave of subpoenas has not only angered creators, but has also turned up zero evidence of any manipulation by Friedman, even though they subpoenaed 107 people. Wayfair's filing paints a very clear picture. Blake's negative publicity isn't coming from some smear campaign. It's the result of her own actions, her celebrity status, and her team's relentless public attacks. Yet, despite that, she's demanding sanctions, attorneys' fees, and even asking the court to revoke Friedman's right to appear in this case. What I love most about this filing is the tone. It's sharp, it's professional, but it's also a warning shot. Wayfair reminds the court that just earlier this month, the judge issued an order warning all parties to cut out the disrespectful language or risk being held in contempt. And Wayfair is basically saying, Blake, if you keep this up, we won't hesitate to seek sanctions against you next. This filing feels like the moment where Wayfair and Friedman finally said, enough. We're done playing your game. They've held back from being snarky, from name-calling, and from stooping to the level of Blake's lawyers. But this time, they're putting her on notice. And besties, just when you think the back and forth couldn't get any more intense, Blake's legal team fires back with a barrage of their own public statements. And these aren't small jabs. These are full-on, headline-grabbing accusations, deliberately framed to paint Justin Baldoni and Wayfair as abusers hiding behind lawsuits. For example, back in January, her attorneys told Deadline that Baldoni's lawsuit was straight out of the abuser's playbook. They accused him of using DARVO, deny, attack, reverse, victim, and offender, to try to flip the narrative. And they claimed Wayfair was using billionaire Steve Sarowitz's money to launch meritless lawsuits and drown out Blake's harassment claims. They framed it as classic retaliation. She spoke up, and now she's being punished. From that moment on, it became clear that Blake's team was setting up a very deliberate story for the media. Every statement, every press release hammered home the same point. Blake is the victim. Justin is the abuser. And anyone who questions her is complicit in victim blaming. Over the following weeks, the pattern continued. They told Deadline that Baldoni's lawsuits were nothing more than PR stunts and bogus filings. They claimed he was trying to sue Blake into oblivion, to silence her, while boldly promising that discovery would reveal shocking secrets about how far he and Wayfair had gone to bury her. They even accused Friedman of hiding evidence, saying he was running to court to keep phone records secret that would supposedly prove a retaliatory campaign. For the record, the judge threw that out and agreed the subpoena was an invasion of privacy. But that didn't stop Blake's team from blasting the narrative that Baldoni and Wayfair were pulling strings behind the scenes. And besties, they weren't just going after Justin, they dragged Taylor Swift into this too. Over and over again, Blake's lawyers claimed Baldoni's team was trying to weaponize Taylor's name, subpoena her, even tie her to the scandal in order to sway public opinion. Her reps painted it as harassment of one of the biggest women's rights icons in the world. And when those subpoenas were withdrawn, Blake's side framed it as a fold, saying Baldoni's camp was using Taylor's fame to distract from the real claims. Now, Wayfair's attorneys hit back hard at this point. They argued that Rule 3.6, the rule Blake is leaning on to punish Friedman, actually allows an attorney to defend their client in the press when the other side is fueling a media storm. And let's be honest, Blake's team hasn't been shy. Their statements weren't quiet. They weren't measured. They flat out called Justin a fraud, a bully, and painted him as a serial abuser. Wayfair's filing makes it crystal clear. If Friedman's comments deserve sanctions, then so do Blake's. Because her side has been just as public, if not more, in trying to sway potential jurors, especially with Taylor Swift's fanbase in the mix. And here's where things get really uncomfortable. Reading all of Blake's statements together, you see the strategy. It's not about the courtroom. It's about the court of public opinion. Her lawyers are deliberately using survivor language, invoking #MeToo rhetoric, and positioning anyone who questions her as someone who blames the victim. They're crafting the story so that even a most ethical, level-headed person feels guilty doubting her. But here's the problem. When you look at the actual records, the unsealed texts, the HR files, the evidence doesn't match the story being told. According to what's on record, the only formal complaint Blake ever made at Sony was that Justin described a character's outfit as sexy. That's it. No HR reports about unwanted kissing, no records of sexual assault allegations, no official filings about inappropriate behavior. Jenny Slate had complaints too, but hers were about housing arrangements and unrelated issues. That's the disconnect. The public narrative is painting Justin Baldoni as this serial predator, while the actual complaints in the record are nowhere near what her team is pushing in the press. And that's exactly why Wayfair is standing firm, saying, "We're not going to let Blake rewrite the story in the media while calling us out for defending ourselves." So besties, where does this leave us? Blake's team is framing this entire case as retaliation for sexual harassment claims, trying to lock in the victim-abuser narrative. Meanwhile, Wayfair is fighting back, saying the sanctions are baseless and that they've only spoken up to counter Blake's relentless PR campaign. At this point, the judge's ruling on sanctions could completely change the tone of this case. Because if the court agrees with Wayfair, it sends a message that Blake can't just run the media war unchecked. But if the judge sides with her again, it could silence Friedman's defense in the public eye, and that's exactly what her team has been pushing for all along. And besties, I mean, let's be real here. I don't know in what world simply looking someone in the eye could be considered sexual harassment, but that's where Blake Lively is taking this. The court is making it clear. If she keeps filing motions filled with disrespect, attacks, and personal digs, Wayfair will not hesitate to hit back. They're warning her, if you don't stop, we will file to have you held in contempt for violating this court order. And their message is sharp. If our conduct is sanctionable, then so is yours. This case is messy. It's exhausting. And honestly, it's painful to cover. Because at its core, it touches on something deeply important, real victims of sexual assault and harassment. But instead of uplifting those voices, it's turned into a circus. A book and a film that could have been powerful tools for survivors have been overshadowed by lawsuits, PR wars, and public mudslinging. And for those of us who have lived through harassment or assault, watching this play out in such a distorted, performative way, it hurts. It makes us all look like liars. And that is devastating. So now I want to hear from you. Do you think the judge will finally step in and put an end to this back and forth? Are you glad to see Wayfair finally standing their ground? Or do you think Blake's legal team will keep pushing this narrative until trial? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I'll be reading them. And besties, don't forget to give this video a thumbs up, subscribe if you haven't already, and hit that notification bell so you never miss the next update. Thanks for watching, and as always, bye besties. Sparkling heart.